What's up everybody, it's me Johnny G and welcome back to the channel for another episode of Cooking with Arknights. Now, what could I be doing here today? We're in the kitchen, obviously. As I said, this is going to be a cooking video, so we're going to be making something in relation to the most recent event, such as the joy of our reunion. Now, what happened in that event? We were introduced to a character named Yu, and Yu is a chef. Yu is one of the Sui siblings. So, Yu had also created a variety of dishes that we heard about throughout the story. Now, what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be bringing Savers at Yu's restaurant to real life with one particular recipe that Yu created during the story that was kind of a focal point later on, from about the midpoint towards the end. Why was that, and what dish do you ask? Well, Yu took a recipe of his own, taught Blaze how to cook it. Blaze cooked it for someone else, Mobufu, and then used that to try and get answers about her father. Mobufu then turned around later and came to Savers at Yu's to try and get Yu to make that very same recipe for him. And that recipe is Yu's Longevity Noodles. Now, I'm a home cook. As you've seen before in some of my other Arknights cooking videos and things like that, I'm not a professional, but I love to take recipes and inspiration from all over the place to create things and bring the foods and things from Arknights to life, like we did with Lapland's Millefoye, for example. Now, how are we going to do this? In real life, there is such a dish as longevity noodles or longevity noodle soup. There's two different ways that I've seen it done. The noodles with a sauce and maybe some sort of vegetable or something like that to it, or as a soup where you make a stock, a broth, and then you put that in a bowl, such as the way it appeared in the story. You can even see it. There is a CG or an image during the story where you get to see the bowl, which appears to have a clear broth of some sort with the noodles and topped off with something like green onions. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. I researched real longevity noodles, how to make some basic noodle recipes from Chinese cooking, as well as how to make a simple broth, which the broth I'm going to be making, we're going to go over basically what I'm using in it, as well as the noodles. And these recipes, everything that I researched, everything that I brought together, I kind of brought together to create my own sort of recipe. And again, as I said, this is not going to be perfect. This is not going to be traditional. None of this is going to be identical realistically to anything you see in the game, in Chinese cooking, whatever. None of this is going to be perfect. That's the best way I can describe it. But it's going to be our own, and we're going to do our best to bring Savers at Yu's to life. So, we're going to start with making a broth here, a stock in a pot. And it's going to be really basic. It's kind of going to be like a chicken-based broth. We're going to use chicken thighs. We're going to use some MSG for flavor, as Uncle Roger says, the king of flavor. We're going to use some simple vegetables, onion, garlic, ginger. We're going to use some star anise, white pepper, cloves, and we're going to bring all this stuff together and create a stock that's going to boil for a while. And then we're going to make a basic Chinese egg noodle based off of a couple of recipes I saw as well, where it's only going to require flour, water, egg, and salt in order to create a simple dough that we'll let rest, cut into the noodles, boil them off, and then in the end, we'll put the broth in a bowl. We'll put the noodles in and we'll top it with green onions to make it very similar to the way it appeared in the CG for the event. So, without further ado, let's get started on bringing Yu's longevity noodles into our world. Now, first thing before we start, we're going to do our vegetable prep. I'm going to go ahead and take my ring off so I'm a little more comfortable here. Now, we're going to start with the ginger, and I already have that scrubbed up on the outside. So I'm going to take my knife and we're going to just chop a couple small pieces off. I broke this off of a larger knob that I had in the fridge. We don't need a whole lot, a couple dime-sized pieces. I usually like to do about 2 to 3 when I do a soup that requires ginger. So I'm actually just going to cut this piece off and set it aside. And we can leave the skin on since we scrubbed it. Now these are going to be a little more nickel-like size, maybe a little bit larger, something to that effect. But we'll add one more. The thing with ginger is if you do too much, it can be overpowering, so we don't want that. Now that's simple. We'll set aside that, and that's ready to go. Now, as I said, we do have shiitake mushrooms as well. So I have a cup of those, roughly a cup, setting aside. They're dehydrated. Now, I did see some things where they mentioned rehydrating them prior, but I think it's going to be a good idea to rehydrate the mushroom by boiling them with the stock, because it's going to rehydrate, but it's also going to bring out the flavor of the mushroom into that pot. So if you guys would do it a different way, let me know what you think in the comments. But we'll continue here, and we're going to chop an onion and then some garlic. We're going to chop the ends of the onion here that I have. I have a fairly decent sized onion, but I'm going to peel. I like to peel the outer layer to make sure that I get all the skin off, and then we will get rid of that. Okay. And in the end, all of this is going to be strained out anyway, so you don't need to do any kind of fancy cuts or anything. We're just gonna chop it in half, quarter each half, and then we'll cut it into some larger chunks here in the end. Nothing too simple. And I'm sure my knife technique leaves a lot to be desired, but that part is done. And then last but not least is we have some garlic. Now, some people like more garlic, others like less. It's kind of up to you how much you do, but a lot of times I see where they'll call for so many cloves of garlic, and we'll see anywhere from 4 to 5 to, a whole bulb. It all depends on your taste. So we're kind of gonna see how many cloves are on this particular bulb and how large they are, because it feels like they're larger cloves. And then we will guesstimate from there roughly how much we're gonna use. Now, personally, I come from a family that loves a lot of garlic. So we could be using a decent amount out of this. Now, I would typically go with 4 to 5 cloves, but as you guys can see, these are actually massive sized cloves of garlic. So we're gonna go with one of these, and then the middle portion is a little bit thinner. So that should equal about 4 to 5 decent sized cloves. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll chop this up as well, just to clean it up a little bit. But again, since it's going to be boiling in the water, in the stock, making our broth, we don't need any kind of fancy chop or anything. It's gonna save us a lot of time in the end too, provided I don't throw it on the floor. Now, I know there's different techniques to peeling our garlic and things like that. I don't know and understand all those, but I'm always open to tips. I'm just a home cook. I've done a little bit of cooking in a kitchen once, but not enough to justify me being any kind of a professional or anything like that. So I just like to cook for home. I like to experiment. I like to feed my family good stuff. So that's why I like doing these kind of videos as well. Experimenting and cooking things from games. I actually have a couple of cookbooks that are the themed cookbooks based on video games and so on and so forth. So all I'm gonna do for this garlic is I'm just gonna cut it up into some slices. That way we have large pieces that'll go in to our stock. Okay, and actually I'll just chop these in half, so just a little bit smaller, and we get a little more pieces floating around. So that's pretty much it for our vegetable prep. Onions, garlic, ginger, all cut up, ready to go. The next thing is going to be assembling our stock. All right, now after fighting a little bit with getting it out of the package, I do have some frozen chicken thighs here. I did originally buy them fresh, but I froze them because I wasn't sure how long it was gonna be until I actually got to do this video. So I got those out of the package, put them in the pot here, and I'm gonna start by adding a gallon of water. That brings us up pretty high, but I'm gonna add about a half a gallon more just to get more water in here to cook this down, to cook the vegetables down and get this all ready to go. Okay. And this should give us a lot of soup in the end. Just be careful not to touch your water pitcher to that. All right, and we're gonna turn this on and let it start. We're gonna put it on high. We wanna get it started to get to a boil, and then we'll cut it down to simmer. Now these are, again, frozen, they're chicken thighs. We'll put them in the water here, we'll cook it all down, it'll be all right. However, you can use thighs, legs. I've seen whole chicken being used for this kind of a recipe. It's kind of up to you. I know the thigh gives a lot of flavor in terms of something like this, and I'm used to using thighs and legs when I do like homemade chicken noodle soup. So that's kind of what we're going for. But hopefully in the end, this broth is gonna come out nice and clear. So what I'm gonna do though now, while we're starting to boil that down, is we're gonna put our vegetables in as well, because we kind of want it all to cook together. And once the chicken starts to cook down into the pot, we're going to go ahead and cover it. We'll put our shiitake mushrooms in. Now we're gonna add our seasonings and stuff. We're gonna start with, I have whole cloves here, which we will add just a couple. We don't need too many. Sometimes you use ground, but you don't want a ton overall in. And I put in probably about the equivalent of a 1/4 teaspoon if it's all ground up. Then we're looking at about a 1/2 teaspoon of white pepper. Probably a little more since we added more water. We're going to add about 3 pieces here of our star anise. And then we are going to add what Uncle Roger refers to as the king of flavor, MSG. Now I'm gonna use about a 1/2 teaspoon, maybe a little bit more there. And now we just wait. We're gonna let this cook down. Once the chicken gets into the pot, we're gonna cover it, let it sit. Once it gets to a nice high rolling boil, then we'll go ahead and just we'll turn it down, let it simmer for maybe about an hour to 2, and then we'll strain everything out when it's done. So let's let it go ahead and do its thing here. Now I don't want you guys to get all fogged up here, but we've had a nice rolling boil. We got it down to a simmer. It's been cooking down, the water cooked off a little bit here, and we're just gonna leave it covered yet for a little while, and it's gonna go for about 1 to 2 hours total. And then once we're done, we're gonna strain everything out. We should be left with a nice, clear, flavorful broth that we will use for our longevity noodle soup. So let's let this go for a bit. We'll keep it covered, and we'll come back in a little while. All right, so as we are waiting to finish up our stock, we are going to work on our actual noodles, our dough for the noodles. So I have a bowl ready, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix our flour, eggs, salt, and water all together, incorporate it into the bowl, and then we are going to knead the dough by hand on the countertop. So we first off need a total of 2 cups of flour. So I scooped out 1 there and just kind of evening it out. And there's 2. That's our 2 cups. Now you could use as little or as much as you want. If you want to double the recipe, you want to make more noodles, you want it more noodle, less broth, to that effect, then you'd want to increase your recipe, increase your portions, of course. But for now, we're keeping it small. So there is our 2 cups of flour. We are going to add about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now I'm just gonna kind of eyeball this. I'm not doing it perfectly, but that's okay. Next up are 3 eggs. 1, 2, and 3. It looks like we got away clean here with no shells, which is beautiful. And now we need to incorporate this together. Now there's a variety of ways you can do this. Personally, when I'm starting a dough like this, I like to use a whisk just to break up the eggs and get those broken up a little bit. And then we start to incorporate it together. However, once we get it a little further in, sometimes I like to just do the mixing by hand. Now the thing is, we're also going to add a little water to this, but I want to break up the eggs first and get that going. And then it says about a tablespoon of water. I like to add about that, depending, and then sometimes a little bit more. So now we've got the base going, and now I got to get my whisk cleaned out here. We'll get our flour and egg mixture out of that just by tapping it against the side of the bowl. And then, of course, you can use your fingers. If you're going to get in here and get messy, might as well. So let's get this cleaned off as much as we need, as much as we can. And then we'll set our whisk aside. And now let's just get in here with our hands, get this all mixed together. Now, as you can see, the dough does start to get a little bit sticky, and it will stick to your hands as it's kind of incorporating, as you're getting things together. And you can see the egg is kind of taking the primary color here of our dough as well. So get as much as you can cleaned off of your fingers, and then if you need to, you don't want to over moisten the dough. But as you can see, there's still a bunch here that's not incorporated into our main mixture. So try to get as much of it in there, because of course you're using all of it, right? But if you absolutely need to, just add a little bit more water, just in little tiny increments, so that you can get this fully incorporated, mixed together, and have everything all as one nice, neat dough ball. Now, we have ourselves a nice, neat dough formation here. I personally added maybe about a half a teaspoon, or half a tablespoon rather, more of water into this mixture in order to get the majority of it all added to here. And of course, I still have some on my fingers, but we want this to work a little bit better so that it becomes a little more of that pasta-like texture that we're going for. So we're going to knead this dough about 15 minutes in total. Now you could do this with a hand mixer or a stand mixer, which could, if you have a stand mixer with a kneading dough hook or something to that effect, would help you in order to do this quicker. You would only need maybe about 5 minutes, but I like kneading dough and stuff by hand. It's kind of a calming thing for me. I do like making doughs and things and cookies and things at Christmas time, so that's one of my favorite little pastimes. So we're gonna keep an eye on the time, and we will knead this for about 15 minutes before we go into letting it rest. Now, as you're kneading your dough, if you feel that it starts to get a little too sticky, make sure that you add just a little bit of flour to help you in the kneading process. You don't want to do too much because you don't want to mess up the incorporation, but you want to make sure that it doesn't stick too much to you and you don't want to lose too much. Again, this is going to come out to be a simple egg noodle. You don't want to overwork it either, but again, the goal is to get this kneaded and then let it rest, and then have yourself a nice, complete ball of dough that we can cut into noodles later. All right, so Now you see, we've got ourselves a nice dough ball here. We're gonna go ahead and put that back in our bowl. We're gonna get some plastic wrap. We're gonna cover this, and then we're just gonna let it rest for that 30-minute period set aside here. There we go. All covered. Let's clean up our mess while we wait. All right, so just a quick update here on our stock. Our stock is done. It's finished simmering. And what I did was I went ahead and I already strained it. I strained out all the chicken and the vegetables. And then I used a metal wire sieve and just basically tried to get out as much of the sediment and stuff as I could. Now, as we let it sit and cool, some of that stuff will settle to the bottom, and then you can clean that out a little bit later, but you'll be left with this nice clear stock. Now, again, this is kind of like a chicken and vegetable kind of stock, but there's really not a lot to it. If you were to taste it right now, it's not going to taste very powerful or potent, but it goes great with your noodles, with your other stuff. If you want to add chicken, you want to add vegetables, you can go ahead and do that. But I definitely would recommend adding some salt or some more MSG or something to it in order to embolden that flavor a little bit more before you go ahead and add the noodles. For me, I'm just adding a little bit of salt and some black pepper, and that should round out the flavor for me. But it works well as a very light broth without a lot to it. And again, when you go ahead and add in everything that is here, you're getting a lot of vitamins, nutrients, that kind of stuff that comes from those vegetables and from the chicken, and good things for you in a good, solid, light broth that won't give you too much in terms of calories and things like that. So overall, this will make a nice dish in the end. But we have one more thing to finish up before we can go ahead and make our finished soup, and that is the noodles. Now our dough's been resting. It's time to go ahead and roll it out and cut our noodles, then get them boiled. All right, so we are nearing the end of our dish here. Our dough for our noodles has finished setting. We've left it sit for over half an hour, and it's nice and ready to go. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to flour our surface here, and we're gonna get ready to roll this out, get it nice and thin, so that we can then cut noodles that will boil off and finish our dish with. So let's make the actual longevity noodle portion of the noodles. And now, after having kneaded that dough for so long and doing all that work, it's actually very nice and soft after having rested, and it actually is working really nicely. I could feel it in my hands, the way it was coming apart. Very simple. It was just really easy to work with. So we'll go ahead and get it rolled out nice and thin. Now, everybody has their own preferences, and you could have it a thicker noodle if you'd like. If you want it more like a dumpling style or something like that, you could go for it. But we're gonna try to go for thinner, longer, lighter noodles. So we wanna have it thin, because also you gotta figure, when you go to boil it, the noodles are going to puff up. So you're going to have them in a thicker capacity then, because they'll absorb. So let's go ahead and try to get our dough thinner and stretched out. Now, you don't want to overwork it again, but at the same time, I like to lift, when I'm working with doughs like this, I like to lift it, flip it, add more flour as I go, for the sake of the fact that I know that on occasion, it'll get stuck if there isn't enough flour and so on and so forth. So, we're getting close already. I don't know if you have a pasta roller, you could do something like that as well. You use a pasta roller and help yourself a little easier, run it through that with the right attachment a couple times based on, again, desired thickness, so on and so forth. But it's all kind of a matter of preference. And the other reason too why I'm going for the longer, thinner noodles is just based on the similar look that we experienced in the event. All right, so we have our noodles. Now, we want to cut them, of course. And there's a couple different ways we can do that. We could simply cut in lines or, cut different, whatever. It's up to you. But in the end, since we're going for the longer noodles, what we're gonna do, I am actually going to cut this in half. I'm gonna cut this dough in half using, you could use a knife. I'm gonna use my little tool here, my little scraping tool, cutting tool. I like using this for things like this, even though I do have a shaky hand. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take each half. We're going to fold it over a couple of times, like this, just to make it easier on us. Fold each half in. Poof. Now we have that, and all we need to do, there should be enough flour on them, but all we need to do in order to finish off our noodles is cut them. This works, or as I said, you can also cut with a knife as well, whatever your preference is. Now, once you're done cutting, you're left with something along the lines of this. And as you see, they can pull apart, they'll get longer. Now I kind of have them, they're longer, they're thin, they're not super, thick or anything like that. And they should do well when we go to cook them off to make a decent noodle soup. However, if you're not ready to use them right away, if you're working on something, maybe you're working on a broth that's gonna last overnight and you wanna use these later, what you can do is coat them in a little more flour and put them in a bowl, refrigerate them until you're ready to use them. But make sure you keep them kind of airtight would be the best way I would recommend, and then they should last you a good while. Other than that, these noodles are ready to go, and I do have my water boiling. Now they're not the most uniform, but that's okay. We're gonna work on cutting our second set here, and we'll have plenty of noodles to make our soup with. Now, a fun fact, if you guys do remember, anybody who read the story, you would know that in the process of making the noodles, one of the things that Blaze had the most trouble with was the actual dough and the noodle portion itself, because of the fact that her high internal body heat, due to her arts and so on, made it so that every time she was working with the dough, she would actually dry it out too much in the process of making it. Adding too much moisture and having it too dry was just not working. It ended up that in the end, she had to work with a technique that Xingshu taught her in regards to making the dough and keeping her temp cool enough. She basically soaked her hands in ice cold water in a sink for a little bit before working with it. And that way, she was able to knead the dough properly and then work with making the noodles. And that helped her in the end. It's always fun to have those little things, those little informative tips and techniques. And it was neat to see her be able to overcome a little bit of a challenge while making it and learning how to cook the longevity noodles. All right, with that, our noodles are ready to go. So as I said, we've got our water boiling and it is ready to boil these noodles and finish our soup. All right, and now our water is boiling, and while waiting for it to boil, I went ahead and I took the liberty of chopping up the green onion to top this soup off with. So we're almost done. Now we need to boil off our noodles. Now these are fresh, and like I said, you can wait and use them later on, but in the process of making them fresh, you come to realize that fresh noodles don't need to cook as long as if they were dried pasta or something pre-made. So in this case, all we're going to do is basically boil the noodles for about 60 to 90 seconds. So I'll go ahead and I will slowly put our noodles in small batches. We don't need to do them all at once. We'll go ahead and put them in small batches, kind of pull them apart and let them fall in nicely. And then we will start timing it. And again, 60 to 90 seconds. So let's go ahead and get these boiled off, get them into a bowl and ready to make our soup. Okay. And as you can see, as they cook, the noodles actually will rise to the top of the water. So they'll cook off, they'll rise to the top, and then we can go ahead and strain them off. And then we're ready to put them aside to dish up our final bit. So we have one more batch to go, and then we'll be ready to make our soup. Now, all that is left in order to finish off the dish is to build the dish itself. So I'm going to use a bowl. We're going to ladle out some of the broth, put our noodles in, top it with some green onions and a little bit of sesame oil, and then we'll have our finished longevity noodle soup. So let's get some of our nice, clear broth in here. We're going to use a small ladle just to control a little bit more of how much broth we get, as well as to make sure that we don't get any of the sediment off of the bottom. And I added some salt and pepper, as I mentioned, to my version of the broth. So I've got some crushed black pepper floating inside. And again, the added salt, just to give it the taste that I want. And now, we'll go ahead and add some of the cooked off noodles. Now, they did come out a little bit thicker than I intended for them, than I wanted them to be. And that's okay, because they're still going to taste good. They're still going to be what I desired in terms of the noodle, in terms of the flavor. However, you could always get, like I said, a pasta roller to make these thinner. If you're more precise with your cuts than I am with my shaky hand, you'd be able to cut it down a little bit thinner yet. Once you start to boil them, they absorb and they puff up really quickly. So it's just a case where it's a matter of preference, and it's a matter of what tools you have to work with and how skilled you are in the kitchen. So we'll put some green onion on top. I like a lot on mine. And then a little bit of sesame oil. And voila, we have our finished longevity noodle soup. Let's give you a quick look at it. Now comes the ultimate test. How does it taste? Let's find out. Get it mixed around in here really well. And then let's take a couple of noodles and give this a try. Wonderful. Simple, wonderful, delicious. I have a feeling that this is going to be something that tastes great overnight. Leaving the broth to sit a little bit more. Leaving it to overall kind of steep a little bit. Add to that flavor by letting it enhance. Oftentimes you can cook soups and things like that, and or certain dishes you can make, and when they sit overnight, you try them the next day, they're much better. Overall, the flavor, when you put all these items together, the noodles, the green onions, the sesame oil, the broth, it makes a very, very pleasant tasting dish. And again, the broth itself is very light. It's delicious. It incorporates your vegetables, your chicken, and so much flavor to create a light broth. And as I said, I only added a little bit of black pepper and a little bit of extra salt in order to get a desired taste, a desired flavor that I wanted. But in the end, it's not overpowering. It's not over salty. It's not over seasoned in one way or another. So you can change and adjust the tastes to how you like it, to how you desire. But this makes me very happy, and it makes me feel comforted. Now, as they said, the longevity noodles are typically something served to somebody like on their birthday. And through my research, I had also discovered that the noodles can also be served during times like New Year's for a celebration in general, seems to be the case, to wish long life and longevity. So, in the end, we made a very fun dish based in the world of Arknights, and I'm very proud of how it came out for my first time making something like this. I enjoyed it, and I hope that everybody else would too, if you guys could only taste what I have right here. With that said though, that is it for this video. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you for listening in, checking out these videos, watching what we do here on the channel, as far as my Arknights content goes, and so much more. Let me know what we should do next. Perhaps maybe we bring you back and we make the tangerine cakes that were also a part of the event. Perhaps we do something else, another flavor of a cake or a food, or maybe a drink like a siesta and iced tea or a minnow and mist. We could try a variety of different things here, and I want to continue to do it and continue to build on cooking with Arknights. Hope you all enjoyed this. Please like the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And with that being said, that is it for this one. And we will see you and you in the next one.